Last week, I was instructing someone on where to leave something outside my apartment building. And I said, just put it on the plinth. And he said, plinth? What's that? And I was trying to describe it to him. I was like, you know, the thing outside the stairs. And so we had our little discussion and we kind of laughed about it. I explained where to put it. And then he said, how do you know that word? And I had to stop and ask myself, how do I know that word? But it got me thinking that there is a beautiful language of architecture and architectural terms. And as I walk around New York City and I'm looking up at all the beautiful architecture, in my head I have these terms, and some of them are very general and some of them are extremely specific. But today I wanted to share some of them with you so that maybe when you're walking around and you're looking at the beautiful buildings, whether it's in New York or in your city, you might remember some of these terms. The language is beautiful, the words are beautiful. So I thought we would start right here on this stoop of this building that's probably late 1800s, early 1900s. A lot of classical Western architecture is rooted in classical architecture from the ancient world, and usually it goes back to the temple, the temples of ancient Egypt and the temples of ancient Greece. The most iconic temple of ancient Greece is the Parthenon, which sits atop the Acropolis in Athens. And if you look at the Parthenon, you will see elements of classical architecture from thousands of years ago that has been pulled into the architecture you will see all over cities like New York. So here we have the entrance of this building. And at the top, we have what is called the entablature. And the entablature is the whole portion of architecture that sits on top of the columns. Okay? Now, in the entablature is made up of three parts. It's made up of the cornice, which is the very top, like you might have heard the term cornice molding. There's cornice molding sometimes on the inside of a room. That top projection is called the cornice. Underneath that, we have the frieze. And the frieze, like in something like the Parthenon, usually has sculpted figures in it. The frieze is the beautiful decorative element that runs continuous. And in these ancient temples, the frieze was often the place where a story was told. You'd have figures moving like this, telling the story of one of the gods, usually the story of the god that the temple was dedicated to. So here in this frieze, we have the actual lettering of the building, the McKinley. So the McKinley is sitting in the frieze. And below the frieze, we have what's called the architrave. Cornice, frieze, architrave. Those three things make up the entablature. Isn't that a beautiful word? Entablature. I think it is. And then below that we have the columns. And the columns are, from the classical world, usually divided into basic, like simple, basic, medium, fancy. That's like the pedestrian way of describing what are called the orders of the column. So the most basic column is the oldest form of the column, which is a Doric column. And this is not a Doric column. When I see one, I will show it to you. Then the next step, so we have basic, which is Doric. The next step is the Ionic column. And then the third, the fanciest, is the Corinthian column. And here we don't have a classical Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian column. It's kind of a mix of different things. It's kind of Corinthian, but I'm going to tell you the terms of the column. So at the very top of the column, the top part of the column, we have the capital. And here on this column, the capital is very fancy. it has acanthus leaves on it. And in the Corinthian column, that's what defines a Corinthian column. The capital has acanthus leaves on it. Then underneath, the part of the column that is round is called the shaft of the column. And then we have the base. That's this part right here. So there's three parts to the column. Beautiful terms. Capital, shaft, and the base. And then this part right here is called the pedestal. And the pedestal serves to elevate the column to a certain height. Usually to elevate it so that your eye line is focused on a certain part of it. And here the eye line is focused on the base when you're standing on the steps. So here we pedestal and then the column. There's a difference between a pedestal and a plinth. A pedestal is decorative. So this has a profile to it that's decorative, and this is called a pedestal. A plinth is something that's very plain. It's like a plain block. You can go ahead. Yeah. So a plinth, sometimes on the front of a building, you'll have a column or you won't have a column and you'll just have a plinth. And when we're walking around, if I spot a plinth, which was the term that started this whole thing, I'll show you what a plinth is. On this facade, we have another element that is a beautiful word, and that's a corbel. And a corbel is a decorative element that's in the form of a bracket. Here we have corbels on either side of the entryway, but then also underneath the arch. That sort of scrolly thing, that's called a corbel, and it's that bracket that's in there. So here we have a facade where the order of the column is Corinthian because at the top we have those acanthus leaves. However, this is not a column. Here is another very, very beautiful word. This is a pilaster. And a pilaster is a flat decorative element with a capital on the top of it and a base, but it serves just to bring decoration around the facade. A column is a freestanding thing, like the round thing with the shaft, the capital, and the base. The pilaster is the flat thing that emulates a column. And you'll see that all over facades of buildings where they didn't put a freestanding column there, but they added the idea of the column. And again, on top of the column, what do we have? Now we know that word. We have corbels. All over New York, all over the world really, you will often see in these classical facades a face. And there are different terms for the faces based on what they are. But if it's a male face, and if it's somewhat ominous, it is called a grotesque. A grotesque. That's what the term is for that face that's sort of like this. There are elements of decorative relief that look very familiar to us because we've seen them everywhere, even in molding, on the interiors of buildings, like on the cornice or around the door frame or in the baseboard. Up here, there is a decorative element called egg and dart. An egg and dart is very, very old. It goes back to the classical world. And that's the element where there is an egg shape. It's kind of a half egg shape that's repeated. And in between that, there's a pointed thing. And that's the dart. We have the egg shape and the dart. So that decorative element is called egg and dart. And egg and dart is in ancient temples as well. But if you go into the Home Depot today, you can find wooden molding that you buy by the foot that's egg and dart. Okay, here we have an example of an Ionic capital. So this is the second order. Doric is the most basic, and then later in time came the Ionic, And that's the capital where there's those little, there's the little curly cues on the side. Ionic capital. And then after that is the fanciest, which is the Corinthian capital with the Acanthus leaves. An Ionic column. Shaft, capital, base, pedestal, plinth. Here we have a plinth. So if I was instructing someone to put the flower pot on the plinth, or I need a couple flower pots for my plinth, I would be talking about this right here. And if we come around to the facade of the building, the front of the building, here's where really you see the plinth. The plinth serves as the transition, and there's kind of another important word, transition, from the pedestal to the street, really, or the sidewalk, essentially. And you can see here, this is a great example of what a plinth is. It's just completely unadorned. It's a block, essentially. And that's what differentiates this from this. This is called a pedestal because it's decorative, and this is called a plinth because it is just completely utilitarian. But what's so beautiful about classical architecture, in this case, is these transitions, and the transitions between shapes, really, and how this was achieved, really going back to the classical world. This is a square, and this is a circle or a cylinder. And in order to go from a square to something round, how is that achieved? And there are many ways that that's achieved in different examples, but if we just had this block and this round thing on top of each other, there's kind of a big change from square to this. It doesn't look nice. It's all this stuff here that makes that transition very beautiful. It's this projection that leads to this part that's still square, and here is exactly where there's the change from square to round. I can't help but see it every time I pass it because I learned about it. And that's why I wanted to share that with you, is once you recognize that, you'll start to see the beauty in these transitions from square to something round. Those windows are a classic style of window that's called a double hung window, where there are two parts to the window, and that is a 6/6, which is a really classic style of window where there are 6 panes at the top and 6 panes at the bottom. And the terms for the pieces of architecture that are above and below the window, the top is called a lintel. That top block of stone is called a lintel. And the bottom part is the term you'll probably know already, the sill, the window sill. And that's the bottom piece of stone that is put into the building that anchors the window frame. Sill, lintel. The motif on the brackets that are holding up the top of this entryway are acanthus leaves. And the acanthus leaf is the botanical motif that you will see over and over in the facades of these buildings, which also goes back to the classical world. It is an actual plant. I saw an acanthus plant a couple years ago and was fascinated to look at the leaf, which doesn't really look like that. It's kind of, this is a very stylized version. But the acanthus motif is just so good for making these transitions from square to circle, circle to square. You can even see the acanthus leaf right here, and you'll often see it curled over at the tip. It's the way that it grows, where there's a central leaf and 2 side parts with this little dip in the middle. that makes it so beautiful is that there's overlap in every single actual leaf. These aren't multiple leaves. This is one leaf, and it just grows this way. Acanthus leaf. That triangular element that's on the very top of that building over there, you'll see it everywhere. You'll see it in entryways. Usually it's sitting on top of columns. That's called the pediment. And that pediment is in the Parthenon. It's another one of those elements that's in temple architecture from ancient Greece. Sometimes in the pediment, there's a decorative element as well that tells a story. In the Parthenon, it was actual sculptural figures that told the story of Athena, told one of the stories of something. Pediment. Over a doorway, if there is a vertical window, that's called a transom. The transom is the window that lets in light over the doorway. And on both these facades, we have transoms over the doorway, and then on either side of the doorway, when there are windows, those are called the side lights. These are beautiful Greek Revival facades. That's the style of this facade here. And the columns are Ionic columns. We see the Ionic capitals. And there's also another really beautiful detail in this ironwork, all this 19th century ironwork. Do you know what this is down here? You'll see these on some of the stairways in New York. It's on the bottom step. This is a boot scraper. There was a time when all of these streets would have been dirt and they would have been filled with horses. So walking around would entail covering your shoes. The soles of your shoes would be covered in muck, and when you were coming back or entering a house, you would scrape off your boots on here before going in. Just look at this. Look at this metal work. Stunning. Finally, something that's my height so I can access it and talk about it. We have the entablature here, this entire part with the cornice, and there's not really a frieze on this, but the reason I wanted to, you can go ahead. The reason why I wanted to show this one to you is because I showed you egg and dart molding or egg and dart sculpture. Here we have a detail that you will see everywhere. It also goes back to the ancient world, and that is dentil molding or dentil relief. And that's when it's just squares like this. Here the squares are very close together. Often they're equally spaced. So you'll have something projecting and then a hollow on the inside. And that's dentil, not dental, but dentil. And again, do you remember what these are called? Not a real column, but the flat addition to the facade, pilaster. We have our pilasters here. Okay, staircase terminology. These stairs are, like all over New York City, are iconic on the facades of these buildings or leading from the facade of the building to the sidewalk. And there are beautiful terms that make up a staircase. So the posts at the bottom, these posts here are called the Newels. And it's the big sort of block that's at the bottom of the banister. And then these, the smaller ones, are called the balustrades, these over here. In terms of the actual stairs, what makes up a staircase are steps. So this entire thing is called a step, and a step is made up of a riser and a tread. This part, the flat part's called the tread, and this part that leads up is called the riser. And this projection here, sometimes in a house, it's actually a piece of molding that's nailed on. It's nailed onto the front of the tread at the end. But here it's all carved as one piece in stone. You can go ahead. And This part right here, the very edge of the tread, is called the nosing. Tread, riser, nosing. Balustrade, newel. Ball. There you have it, some architectural terms that I feel just add beauty to your mind when you're walking around and you know what those things are called. Now that you know them, you'll start seeing them everywhere. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.